Hi guys, it is an absolutely gorgeous day here in paradise on Friday afternoon, March 10th, 2017. So history is being made for the second time this week on Humpty Dumpty Tribe, and as part of my new, hopefully improved YouTube channel, I am now going to dive into the Humpty Dumpty Tribe interview section, and I am thrilled to admit that the very first person I am ever going to interview on Humpty Dumpty Tribe is none other than my Humpty Dumpty Tribe hero, Carolyn Baker. I have mentioned Carolyn many times, I'm sure, over the past 6 years. I first heard about Carolyn, it was Michael Rupert, the late great Michael Rupert brought me to Carolyn's attention. So I am just going to introduce Carolyn a little bit, and then we're pretty much going to turn this over to her. So Carolyn does have her own website, Carolyn Baker, that's L-Y-N, not L-I-N-E, carolynbaker.net, all one word, has an excellent website that I encourage you to visit. Okay, about Carolyn. Carolyn Baker's mission is to create islands of sanity in a sea of global chaos. This mission necessitates the development of a variety of emotional tools alongside commitment to spiritual transformation. Through her multifaceted outreach via webinars, podcasts, live workshops, books, and articles, as well as one-on-one life coaching, Carolyn is touching the lives of thousands to assist them in preparing for the dire consequences of the collapse of industrial civilization and abrupt climate change. One of her principal goals at this time is to expand her teaching outreach online by presenting more webinars and online workshops, as well as workshops for live audiences. And so as part of, to help Caroline achieve one of her principal goals, to expand her teaching outreach online, we are welcoming Carolyn Baker to Humpty Dumpty Tribe. Welcome aboard, Carolyn.
Well, thank you so much, Hambone. It is wonderful to be here on this Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Is there anything, before we dive in, is there anything you personally would like to add to that lovely introduction that I missed?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Mike Rupert, for helping me understand how important it is to gather, bundle, and send out alternative and even mainstream news every day to keep people informed about what's really happening. So I have published for the last 10 years, 7 days a week, unless I'm sick or traveling, a daily news digest that is subscription-based. And I want to let people know about that. Go to my website and click on the subscription tab and read about how you can become a subscriber to the Daily News Digest. I have many, many subscribers who are addicted to it and freak out, when they know that I'm not going to be publishing for a couple of days. And I really enjoy putting it out every day, gathering and bundling that news and sending it out, because I think it is extremely important for people to know what's going on. And, yeah, you can read any of the stories that I publish. You can read them online. But what I do for you is I provide some convenience so that you don't have to go hunting for all those stories. I cover economics, environment, geopolitical issues, civil liberties issues, cultural issues, and then I have something in each edition which few people who put out news digests have, and that is an inspiration section, maybe 4 or 5 stories about how people around the world are dealing with our global crisis in an inspiring way.
Okay, since you mentioned, I definitely need to subscribe to that. Good Lord, I have so many of these already but there's never too much information. So now I know one thing that I've actually thought about. Now I have never, at least since I went down this rabbit hole myself in 2008, I have never gone to see a therapist. And one reason for that, Carolyn, is because just like in the general population, I cannot imagine that there's even many psychotherapists who have any clue about what is unraveling on this planet. And so I assume the general population of psychotherapists is about the same as the general population of humanity. So I want you to just again, this could take 30 minutes, explain in a nutshell how you would describe essentially the situation on this planet that is transpiring, and after that we'll come back and talk about what to do about it. So what do you think
Sure.
about the situation?
I will say lots of things about the situation. I want to just address quickly the issue of psychotherapists. I think increasingly psychotherapists are waking up to our predicament. Maybe 5, 6 years ago, if you went into somebody's office and talked about, I'm really concerned about the collapse of industrial civilization and abrupt climate change, they might have said, well, dear, let me give you a prescription for medication. But increasingly, I'm finding colleagues who know colleagues who know colleagues who are really waking up to this and do not think that people are crazy because they are becoming just as scared in their own right as they look out into the world. And so that's not true of all therapists, but there are some out there who are awake and aware. I do life coaching with folks. I'm not a therapist, but I do life coaching and spiritual counseling with folks who want to talk about what is going on, who are distressed about it, don't have a place to talk about it, or maybe they realize the predicament and they're going, I don't want to keep doing what I've been doing in terms of work or in terms of career. I want to do something else with my life that really addresses this crisis. Help me find some way to redefine that. Or people might have, anxieties or panic attacks about what's going on, and they want some help with that. Or a very common issue that I work with folks on is grief. And how we can use grief creatively and constructively as we go through this process. What I think is going on is we have come to the end of the line of unlimited growth on a finite planet. Human beings are trying to live as if we have 25 or 30 planets instead of the one that we have. There is no plan B for this planet. This is it. And so we are coming down to the end of industrial civilization. It's not working anymore. We are also experiencing abrupt climate change, which means that it is going so quickly that we really can't get a handle on it. As Guy McPherson writes about in his voluminous work on abrupt climate change, we're experiencing a lot of self-reinforcing feedback loops, I think now up to 40 or 45, which just means that as climate change happens, there's a mechanism within it that makes it worse. And so whatever is happening today is going to intensify within the next few years. And what we're experiencing today in terms of climate change are the impacts that began 40 years ago. There's a 40-year lag time in what is being manifested right now in terms of climate change. So what we're experiencing right now was created in the 70s. And 40 years from now, if there are any human beings left on the planet, they will be experiencing what we're creating right now. So it's not a pretty picture. whether it is, economic collapse, whether it is abrupt climate change, whether it is lack of food and clean water, whether it is pandemics that are likely to get unleashed by this environmental catastrophe. All of these things are possibilities, and we are looking at them, or at least they're looking at us, and we're in a very, very dire situation. I do not care to put dates on this, like, humans are going to be extinct by 2026 or anything like that. I don't know, and nobody else does either. Guy McPherson doesn't know. I don't know. You don't know. No one knows for sure. But where we're going is not good. And we are headed into a trajectory of destruction that we have created ourselves. And so, of course, as we really are willing to look at that, which few people are, a lot of feelings are going to come up for us. And the big four emotions that I have found come up for people are fear, anger, grief, and despair. And these are some of the emotions that I help people with in life coaching. They are emotions that we need to, as I say, befriend and utilize as we go through this process. And it is a process. And there are some specific tools that I offer people, in my coaching and my writing, specific things that I think we can do. So I want to stop there and catch a breath myself and give you a chance, Hambone, to catch a breath, see if you have any further questions.
Yeah, well, obviously, I want to develop this while you take a breath and a drink of water. One thing...
Yeah, I just did that.
Before we get into that, one aspect that you did not mention, which is a constant theme that I talk about in my own videos and that I hear on comments. I mean, today I've received 3 comments, and this is about what any of us down in this rabbit hole experience, and that's the fact that we can't talk about this, just what we consider the most fundamental thing to talk about on the planet, that people just don't want to hear it. Our family members, our own children. I can imagine in a marriage if one person goes down this rabbit hole and the other one's not ready for it. And talk about that a minute, and then we're going to start talking about things that you've discovered that help. So could you address that whole situation of people not wanting to hear this message?
Right. Well, I actually deal with this constantly. A lot of people who come to me for life coaching or spiritual counseling are dealing with this exact issue. And I would say the first thing that you need to put at the top of your list, if you're dealing with a spouse or a child or a parent who has a very different perspective on this, is first of all, just love them. Practice loving them. You may or may not be able to change them, but it's very important that you love them and that you are able to receive love from them, and that love is much more important to you than whether or not they agree with you. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is, it's really important not to go on a big campaign of, I need to change this person, and buy into this delusion that if I just give them the right articles, they'll wake up. If they just watch the right documentary, they will wake up. Because you see, what we're doing there is we're approaching this on an intellectual level. And I am here to tell you that none of this is intellectual. None of this is about information. Most of this is about emotion. Most of this is about what happens in your gut when you start thinking about abrupt climate change, when you start thinking about economic collapse, or, the terrible predicament that we're in. That brings up these big four emotions that I talked about: fear, anger, grief, despair. And so there have been many books written on why people simply cannot talk about climate change. My friend and colleague Dean Walker is about to release a book on this topic called The Impossible Conversation, because for a lot of people it is impossible. So I would say, love the person. Do not think that you're going to change them with information. And, talk about what you can talk about with them, but find other places of support where you can talk with people who are on the same page. That might be in a Facebook support group. There is a near-term human extinction support group, a near-term human extinction love support group. There is a special group for parents who are aware of this called Whistling in the Dark. These are all on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk to somebody like me. You can find groups around you who are aware of some of these issues. They may not be aware of all of them, but perhaps you want to take a permaculture course if you haven't already done that. And you may not be able to talk about all of these issues with everybody in the course, but you'll have some place where you can touch in on some of these realities. We have got to have a sense of community, because part of the reason we're in the situation we're in is this horrible industrial individualism and isolation that we have been born into. And so we have to find ways to create community. And, and to have around us allies, whether that's online or in person, that we can really commune with in this way. That's the first way I would like to answer your question.
Okay, so let's talk about as I say, I could sit here and go down any line of conversation, but for time's sake, let's talk about the individual when you are sitting alone, as I think a lot of us are. When we are sitting alone with these thoughts, just hammering our brain, and we're not talking to somebody, what is your number one piece of advice about how just not to let this overwhelm you and sink literally into existential despair? What's the big secret to avoiding going there?
Okay. Well, the first thing is something that most people didn't get the memo on in this culture, so we need to be reminded. We're all going to die at some point. Sooner or later, we're all going to die. Now, some of us may be going extinct at ages much sooner than we would have thought. And some of us might live to be ripe old age. We have no idea. But the first thing is we need to come to terms with death. And your own death. I wrote with Guy McPherson a book called Extinction Dialogues. He wrote a chapter on the science, and the next chapter would be one by me, in which I'm helping people cope with the existential issues around realizing you're going to die, and then he wrote the science, and then I wrote another chapter on emotions, and so on and so on. So to come to terms with, okay, I'm going to die, so how do I want to live in the meantime?
Exactly.
I wrote an article it's on my website somewhere. You can just Google it. Is there life before death? Because sometimes when people learn about near-term human extinction, they become very obsessed with, oh my God, when? How many years do I have? When's it going to happen? How's it going to look? Oh my God. And, the idea is we don't know. Like I said, nobody knows for sure. The question is, how am I going to live in the meantime? How am I going to live with purpose and meaning and joy and love and community in my life? How do I create as much beauty in my life as I can? How do I serve other living beings? These are all things that we need to be preoccupied with instead of obsessing constantly about extinction and about our predicament. So, there's going to be a lot of loss. And so as we become familiar with how to do grief work, we are much more equipped to deal with loss. Because grief becomes not this terrible thing we have to run away from, but it becomes a doorway to deeper meaning and purpose. I think it becomes a doorway to more love and sharing with our friends and loved ones. And ironically and paradoxically, grief and joy travel together. I've done a lot of grief workshops, and at the end of every single one, I've had people tell me, I had no idea, but experiencing grief this deeply has allowed me to experience joy more deeply. So grief and joy travel together. When you're grieving, there's a potential for great joy. And when you're extremely happy, just notice that there's probably some grief around on the edges someplace that you'll need to deal with because they travel together. So those are some of the basics. I would say become accustomed to doing journaling. Sit down and journal a bit, 5 to 10 minutes every morning, and just be with your thoughts. If you have a meditation practice or you would like to develop a meditation practice, do that. Body practices like yoga, tai chi, qigong, all of those things that cause energy to flow and bring a smoothness of energy in your body. Spend time in nature as much as you can. Really, really develop an intimacy with nature. And, when people work with me or they read my books, I have specific practices that help people go out in nature and become very comfortable with it. In fact, in love with it. So these are some of the basic tools that we can use that keep us sane and keep us alive and healthy and passionate about our lives. Because we don't have to crawl under a rock or be suicidal every day or be living in this attitude of, well, I've only got a few years left, so what the fuck, We can live perhaps even with more life and passion than maybe we would have without this crisis.
There you go. It's a strange door has opened in the evolution of human consciousness. That's one way of looking at this. Anyway.
Before we go on too far, I just want to mention one thing, and that is my most recent book that I wrote with my dear friend Andrew Harvey called Return to Joy. It's a little 110-page book with suggested exercises and practices in it. It is a huge toolkit for creating joy and purpose in your life in the face of the era of extinction. So you can find out about that on my website.
On carolynbaker.net. Okay. As I say, I would love to sit here and talk to you for hours, but we're 24 minutes into this, and as I say, I don't need to turn this off at exactly 30 minutes. I just didn't want to use up too much of your time. But this whole conversation, this interview would not have been the same on November 7th, 2016, as it is now. And it's as much as I don't want to talk about this subject, there's just no getting around the fact that the world did change. On November 8th, 2017, and changed even more on November 8th, 2016, and changed even more on January 20th, 2017. and we've got a mess on our hands. And I just want, again, just kind of a subset of what we talked about. I want to get what you're, just a quick overview of how you would define this new level of mess that we are in, and then again respond to what we can do both publicly to address this, and more importantly, what can we do just not to be just completely demoralized about the latest developments it's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So take it away on this whole dreary subject.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that I write a lot about and have written much more about in recent years, and recently wrote a book on, is the human shadow. The shadow is the part of any person or culture that we disown and we send away, and we say, that's not us. As an individual, we say, I'm not dishonest. I'm filled with integrity and honesty, and so we send away those parts of us that are dishonest, and we all have parts of us that are dishonest. We disown anything that doesn't fit with our image of ourselves. And so in the American cultural psyche, there are 4 enormous shadows that we have never dealt with. We have never dealt with the genocide of millions of native peoples when Europeans came to this continent. We have never dealt with slavery. We have never dealt with the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we've never dealt with the fact that we are and continue to be an empire. And so when you send the shadow away and disown it, it doesn't go anywhere. It just gets bigger and comes back to bite you in the butt. And so what is happening, what I see, the top of the list is happening, is that Donald Trump is a shadow magnet. He has been created by the American shadow. He is a reflection of who we have become. So one of the things that I suggest people do, and in my recent article that is on my website, entitled, I've got a couple of them, but the most recent is Navigating the Trumpist Chapter of Civilization's Collapse. First article on my website. One thing I suggest is we look at our own inner Donald Trump. You know, all of the things that all of the things we detest about him. What parts of that live in us? Okay, so that's one thing. So, you know, he's a reflection. He's a shadow magnet for this culture. And there's no question in my mind that he's an autocrat. He's a very sick person. He's a narcissist to the max. He's a sociopath. And he has behind him a man who's even sicker, Steve Bannon, who is pulling the strings, who is very much, you know, the puppet master of Trump. I think Trump is his shill. And Bannon is a dyed-in-the-wool white nationalist fascist. And Bannon's desire is to smash everything, burn it to the ground, and start over. And by starting over, what that looks like is only white people and, you know, the wealthy in charge, and total autocratic control by, you know, the corporatocracy. So he is fascism incarnate. And Bannon's intention is to destroy and burn down the U.S. government. Now, I think everybody listening to my voice would agree that the United States government needs to be transformed and a lot of changes need to be made, and that, yeah, that government is collapsing and will continue to collapse. There's no question about that. But number one, there's going to be a tremendous amount, and there already is a tremendous amount of suffering involved in collapse. It's going to hit poor people and people of color the hardest. And the second thing is, yeah, the government needs to collapse and be transformed, but not an autocratic fascist state put in its place. So I don't see any capacity for the Democrats to really stop this. I think it's a runaway train, but I do think that the intelligence community, which many people would argue is part of the deep state, they took out JFK for much less than this. You know, JFK back in the 60s said, I'm going to break the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Well, we know what happened to JFK. I don't know if they plan to assassinate Trump, but I don't expect him to be around more than a couple of years, because I think that he will be taken out by the powers that be that are really greater than he is. There may be some kind of civil war or revolution that happens in this culture in the meantime. But I can't see him hanging around much beyond 2 years. What we will then get is Mike Pence, who is a colder, kinder, more religious fascist, who will, he might appoint a vice president like Mike Huckabee or some other raving, screaming, born-again Christian to serve with him. So that'll be a different kind of fascism, which is probably even more dangerous. So, in other words, things are not looking good. And what I and Andrew Harvey are doing now, we're working on a new book, and we have 4 main points in there. You asked me, what can we do about this? Well, that's what our whole book is about. The title of our book is Beyond Illusion, Straight Talk for the Dark Night of the Globe. And we are talking about the 4 R's. Reconnection. Reconnecting with ourselves, with each other, and with Earth on a very deep and spiritual level. Resistance. We must resist what's going on. And we talk in the book about different strategies for doing this. We have to do this very carefully because, people like Bannon just welcome protests so they can mow people down. So we have to be very shrewd and strategic about it. We also talk about resilience, which is a huge piece. How do we become, each one of us individually and as communities, resilient with all that we're facing? And then finally, regeneration. What do we create to leave behind for anybody who might survive us for however long or short that is? So we hope to have this book out in June. But that's in a nutshell what I see happening and what we can do.
All right. Well, I think that, as I say, I would love to sit right here for the rest of this beautiful day and talk to you about we're at the 3232 point.
Okay.
So
well,
I hope to continue this
sequel
conversation in the future. And anybody you want to share this conversation with, certainly let them know that for what it's worth, Hambone Littletail would love to interview anybody else who would like to talk to me. I would like to talk to them, because any friend of Michael Rupert's is a friend of Hambone Littletail's and Humpty Dumpty tribes. So,
well, I will send you Dean Walker, who's really writing the book Impossible Conversation. He and I are in cahoots. We're doing a lot of online teaching together and live workshops, and you'll be hearing a lot more from us. Okay. And I'll send him your way, because I'm sure he'd like to talk to you.
All right. I look forward to that. Well, one more time before we go, carolynbaker.net, straightforward. There is a wealth of information on there, so take it over from here on to there, and hopefully we will be checking back in with Carolyn sometime in the future as the Trumpist scene unfolds. I'm sure we'll be wanting to get your comments as this all unfolds on the planet. But I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my Hambone heart for being the very first interview on Humpty Dumpty Tribe, and may this be the first of a long line of such interviews. So, unless there's anything else you would like to add on the way out?
Just thank you so much for having me on. Please go to my website and check out all the resources there. Listen to my podcast, which is posted on Facebook and on my website every Monday morning, The New Lifeboat Hour.
Thank you very much. We will do just that. Be talking to you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.